Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. In this episode I'm going to take a look at a prototype of Wizards of Roygbiv by Sam Meurs, which will be on Kickstarter soon. I'll put a link in the description. And this is a deck building game of wizards who are battling out in a tavern, trying to be the last man standing or be the first guy to score a fatality. You can play 2 versus 2 or 2 versus 2 versus 2 or more in teams, and it's also played, of course, 1 versus 1. It has deck building, it has some interesting mechanics on your health and your energy that you can spend on spells. And it's very colorful. It's of course about the colors of the rainbow. There are 7 decks in here, so you can play with basically 7 different strategies. And it's still a prototype, but I'm going to show you how to set up a game, how it plays. I'll explain the rules, and then lastly I'll give you my final thoughts. To set up a game of Wizards of Roygbiv, you put all the 7 different colored decks on the table, as well as all the white neutral spells, and these are 6 of each, and these are all different cards. You also make a pile of these corruption cubes, your power crystals, and your barrier crystals, which in the final version will be blue instead of purple. Each player then takes a reference card, which I'm assuming will be something like this. This is printed on the prototype rulebook, and it has several icons that will tell you what they mean, and in the final version players will have a reference card for that. And next, every player picks one of the 7 wizards. You can decide who starts first, and then that player will have the first pick. So I've laid out 4 here. There's 3 others. So there's the green one called Gaius, there's a yellow one called Yen, and there's a violet one called Evoker, and there's indigo Iggy, the red wizard Ragnar, the blue Beauregard, and the orange Ocaria. And as you'll notice, they all start with the letter that also is their color, which technically is Roygbiv. So you got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Once everybody has decided on which wizard to play, then each wizard takes their entire deck of cards, and you can read them and see what they do. And then you can pick 3 of those, shuffle the rest, and put them back on the table. Each player also gets 20 white cubes and 5 cubes of their own color, and puts them on their board like this. The board has space for exactly 25 cubes, so this is also your maximum number of cubes that you can have. The white ones are your health, and the colored ones are your energy. Once you've selected the cards you wanted to use, the 3, and shuffled the remaining ones and put them back on the table, you also get to pick 2 different spells from the neutral spell decks. So for example, you want this one and this one, and you add them to your hand. So then you take those 5 cards that you selected, you shuffle them, and you place them to the left of your player board at your drawing side, and that is now your starting deck. Each player starts out with 2 power crystals, except for Ragnar, whose special ability is that he gains 3 at the start instead of 2. The starting player gets 0 barrier tokens, the second player gets 1 barrier token, the third gets 2, and so on. Make sure you've read your special ability of your wizard, so you know what your wizard does. Then you draw 3 cards from your draw deck, and that is your starting hand, and then you're ready to play the game. Okay, a game's turn is actually quite simple. It consists of 8 steps, which are indicated on the board over here. Each wizard has these, and they're usually the same. There are some exceptions, but most of these are the same for all wizards. So the first thing you do is check how many spells you have in your hand. Now, your first round, you'll have 3 cards in your hand. But on next rounds, you could have more than 3 cards. So you check, and for each card in your hand over 3, you need to lose 1 health. This cannot bring your health below 1. Then at step 2, you check to see if you have any summoned cards in play, like this one, which we can recognize by that icon over there. And if that card has a start of turn ability, then you trigger that ability first. Next, you gain 5 mana, if you have the room for those cubes, that is. And then you can start casting spells from the cards in your hand, and the casting cost is in the top right corner, indicated with the numbers 2 and 3 in this example. And you can pay for that by using your mana, your energy over here, or health cubes. Then you get to bury 1 spell, which means you take the top card of any of the decks that are on the table and you put it at the bottom of the deck. So that could mean that your deck's color, in this case orange, perhaps has a card on the top that you do not want to get, and you're placing that on the bottom, hoping to find a better one. Or you see a card of an opponent's color, and you're deciding, well, that card, I don't want them to have that card on the next turn because it's a powerful card that could, interfere with my strategy, so I'm going to put that at the bottom of the deck. This, of course, only works for the colored decks, as the white decks are all the same cards. And then next you can gain 1 new spell. So you may take the top spell from any pile in the spell pool and take it in your hand. Now, whenever you're taking a spell of your own color, then that's free. The neutral white cards are also free. But whenever you're taking a card of a different color, you have to pay additional mana. So in this case, I'm orange. A yellow spell would cost me 1 mana, a green one 2, a blue one 3, and all the others would cost me 4 extra mana. So I need to be able to pay that, because I cannot pay that with health. So then I draw 2 new spells from my draw deck on the left of my player board, and then I may discard cards from my hand. So if I have over 3 cards in my hand, which is usually the case, then you can discard down to 3 if you do not want to lose health on your next turn. There are some optional rules. You can also bury as many spells as you like by paying 1 mana for each spell buried beyond the first. And another optional rule is unlimited gaining, where you can gain more spells than 1 by paying 2 additional mana for each spell gained beyond the first. So let's talk about the anatomy of a card for a minute. So first of all, this square or diamond shape over there means mana, so that means your energy that you need to cast a card, which is also the number in the top right here. So this is the number of mana or health you need to spend to cast this card, and these icons also refer to mana. The heart icon is obviously your health. The sunburst over there is your corruption, and all of these 3 are represented by cubes. So we have black corruption cubes, we have colored mana cubes, and the white health cubes. The flame means your power, which is represented by the red crystals. And the shield icon is your barrier, which is represented by blue crystals. I have purple ones in this prototype. The wizard's hat means the target wizard, and this includes yourself as well as all the other players. This target symbol means that you can target any spell with this, so basically any spell card that's being cast. This icon means that this card is a sorcery, which you can only play during your own turn. This icon is a summoning, which is a creature or a item that you play during your own turn, and you place that card in your own field and it stays there until it's destroyed. And finally, you have spell weaves, which are basically like in Magic the Gathering, interrupts, so cards that you can play outside of your turn. So each card has a spell type, a spell cost, its name, and the spell effect printed on the bottom of the card. Some cards have an overload ability, which means that at the point that you cast this spell, you have to tell all the other players if you're going to overload that spell. And that means that it gets an extra ability, something really powerful, but after that the card is removed from the game and does not go into your graveyard, even when it's countered by one of the counter spells. The red power crystals are used to buff certain spells, and the blue barrier crystals are used to absorb damage done to you. Corruption cubes are cubes that are dealt to you by certain spells, and you have to place them in your bar, and basically costing you space for other resources. Whenever an effect tells you to draw a spell, it always means you draw from your draw pile. And when there are no spells left to draw, you must draw more, and you shuffle your discard pile. And that becomes your new draw pile, and if your discard pile is also empty, then you simply do not draw additional cards. Gaining new spells always means from the spell pool over there, and that means you get to pick one of the top cards of any of the piles in the center of the table. Unless mentioned otherwise, you must pay the appropriate spell cost mentioned on your wizard board over there. The order of execution of spells is very important in this game. So there is a certain order to resolve spells. So first of all, you announce the name of the spell that is being cast and you're going to play. Then you announce if you are overloading it or not. Then people can announce spell weaves, so the interrupt spells. And they may be cast in the same order as the turn order in case multiple people want to cast something. Then after that, new spell weaves may be announced because you could technically counterspell a counterspell. And then when everybody is done spell weaving, you resolve them in backward order until the first card that was being cast. So just keep in mind the chronological order in which these cards are being cast, and that is basically the whole order of execution that you need to remember. Whenever a rule or on a spell or wizard board conflicts with the rule from the rulebook, then the card wins, and you are also not allowed to directly cause your own death. For example, by casting a spell with your last remaining health points. If you lose your last remaining health to a non-player effect, such as starting your turn with too many cards in your hand, then you must keep 1 health and live to die another turn. But if you are forced to draw a card by an opponent, and then you die from having too many cards at the start of your turn, then you do die because the opponent is basically granted the kill. And those are technically all the rules you need to know to play Wizards of Roygbiv. Let me just do an example round for you. The game comes with an introductory scenario where every player gets 4 of these shield crystals and 3 of 2 power instead of Ragnar, he gets 3. And all players start out with their starting 5 cards on their hand. So at the start of this example round, Ragnar starts out with 5 cards in his hand, which means he should lose 2 health, but he discards 2 barrier crystals instead. He's got no summons in play, so that phase is skipped. Next he should gain 5 mana, 5 energy, but since his bar is already filled, he can't gain extra mana. And next, Ragnar pays 2 energy to cast Channel Power. After paying the cost, the spell will resolve, and this spell says that you gain 1 power. He's not going to overload the spell, he's just going to cast it, and it goes to his discard pile. I'll just put that here for now. So he gains 1 power, and he now has 4. Next, he spends 3 more mana in order to cast Mirrored Missiles from his hand, which is this card. It costs 3 mana, and it targets up to 2 wizards, and each wizard takes damage equal to your power. So he's got 4 power, and he is targeting Beauregard and Iggy. So now they can interrupt if they want to, and Beauregard decides to counter that with this counter spell, costing him 3 energy. And it says this spell has no effect unless its caster chooses to be damaged 4 damage and corrupted 2, which is quite a lot. So he plays this. This goes to his discard pile and costs him 3 energy. And Beauregard decides to let it happen, so his magic missile spell fizzles and dies and goes to his discard pile. Then Ragnar decides to leave it at that, so the next step would be to bury a spell. So he checks the cards and he sees, well, that's a card I might like to get, so I'm going to see if there's other cards there that I do not like my opponents to have. So for example, he doesn't really like this card a lot, and he puts that at the bottom of that deck. Next he decides to gain one new spell from his own stack, so that is free for him. He could also have taken one of the free neutral white cards, but he's going to take this instead, and that goes straight to his hand. Then he needs to draw two spells, but since he already had all the cards on his hand, he does not have a draw pile, so he takes these two cards. He basically needs to shuffle them, but as he gets to draw two, he takes both of those on his hand, and he now has 6 cards in his hand. Ragnar does not want to lose any health on his next round, so he chooses 3 of those cards and discards them. So he puts those on the discard pile, and the rest stays in his hand. Next it's Beauregard's turn, who now has only 4 spells in her hand left, because she already used counter spell. And that means she has to take 1 damage. She could use one of those shields, but she decides to take the damage. She also has no summon cards in play, so that step is skipped. Next she gains 5 mana and 1 shield, so she takes 4 because that's the space she has left. This gives her 6 mana at the moment because one of these health cubes was removed, and she gains a shield token. And then she decides to cast Sword and Shield, which costs 2 energy, and you can choose either to damage a wizard for 3 or gain 3 shields. So she decides to cast it on herself for 2 energy, discarding that spell like so, and then she gains 3 shield. Next she also buries the top card of her own deck because she doesn't need that one, and she sees this one, which is more beneficial to her at the moment. So she gains 1 new spell, takes that card into her hand. She then draws 2 cards, but she has no cards, so she shuffles these 2, and there are only 2 again, so she draws all of those onto her hand, and then she discards 3 cards to avoid getting damage. Then it's Iggy's turn, who also has 5 cards on his hand in this round example, and thus should lose 2 health, and he will decide to do that because then he can gain some extra mana. Also no summons, gain 5 mana, so in this case he can actually gain 2 mana right away. Then he looks at his spells and decides to play Power Conduit, so that costs 3 mana, and a target wizard loses 1 power and may purify up to 2 corruption, and another wizard gains all the power that was lost and corruption. So he pays the 3 energy needed for that spell and targets Ragnar. He asks if anyone wants to interrupt, but Ragnar cannot because he only has sorceries on his hand. If Ragnar, for example, had this rebuke spell, then he could have paid 4 energy, or in this case 4 health, because he doesn't have any energy left, to counter that spell, and then the caster of that spell is damaged health equal to your power, and you can ignore shield. So that would have been nice to have had, but he discarded it. So now he just lets it happen, and he loses 1 power, which goes to Iggy. Next, Iggy decides to cast Transferring Missiles. So a target wizard loses cubes equal to your power, and you can ignore shield. So another wizard gains any of those, any magic power, mana, and or health lost. So in this case he's going to target Beauregard. He pays 4 energy and 1 health to cast this spell, and since Iggy has 3 power, Beauregard loses 3 of his cubes. Beauregard quickly checks his spells if he can do something about that. And he has a redirect spell, which costs 2, and says the caster of the spell must choose a different target or take the spell back in hand. Its cost remains paid, and they may cast it again immediately. If they take it back in their hand, of course. So in this case, he's going to do that, and he's going to pay, or she's going to pay, 2 magic cubes, 2 mana, to redirect that spell. So Iggy has no choice, and he's going to put the transferring missiles onto Okaria. So then she loses a number of power, or I should say mana, equal to my power, so that's 3, and she decides to just let that happen. You ignore any shield, so if there was damage done, then normally you would have taken away some shield if you wanted to prevent health from losing. So in this case it's just mana. And another wizard, Iggy himself, gains any of those cubes that were lost. So in this case they only lost mana, so Iggy gains 3. Iggy is on his next step. He's going to bury 1 spell. This is an expensive one, so he thinks, now let's just put that at the bottom. He gains a new one. This one, which is cheap, is just 1 power, so that's good. Puts it in his hand, then draws 2 spells. There's nothing to draw, so these 2 cards get shuffled and redrawn. And now he's got 6 cards in his hand and decides to discard these transferring missiles because they are so expensive, and maybe the power conduit as well, keeping 4, which means he will lose 1 health on the next turn, but that's a choice he's making. So next is Okaria's turn. She has 5 cards in her hand, and due to her special ability she can have up to 5 spells in her hand without penalties, so she takes no damage in this time. She also has no summons, so that turn is skipped. She gains 5 energy, but she can only gain 3, the 3 she lost previously, filling up her bar again. She then decides to cast Bestow Power, which costs 2 mana, and a target wizard gains 1 power. And she can also overload it to draw a spell, but in this case she's got all the cards in her hand, she's just going to play the regular version. Nobody's going to interrupt that. So she's going to pay 2 mana and gain 1 power. Next, she decides to play Resonating Missiles, which costs 3 energy, and the target wizard is damaged health equal to your power, plus 2 health for each counterspell, basically, affecting this spell. So she pays 3 energy from her energy bar over here, spending all her energy. People are then allowed to interrupt. Next, she's going to interrupt her own spell with Fan the Flames, which costs 3 energy, and any wizard affected by your spell are damaged, health equal to your power. Her power is 3 at the moment. She's got 3 of these crystals, so she's going to cast that on top of this. That is going to cost her 3 health though, but it's a risk she's willing to take. But now Beauregard decides to cast Reactive Banner, which costs 3 energy, and the caster of a target takes damage equal to the loss of shield it caused after it resolves. So she needs to pay 3, which is 2 mana and 1 health. Next we resolve all the spells, and we'll start with Reactive Barrier, since that was the last one that got cast. So this spell, Reactive Barrier, was targeting Resonating Missiles, so that caster takes damage equal to the total loss of barrier it cost after it resolves. Since it hasn't resolved yet, then the next spell to resolve is Fan the Flames. So any wizard affected by this spell are damaged equal to your power. So Beauregard takes 3 damage and decides to get rid of 3 barrier instead of health. So this one has been resolved and is discarded. And next the Resonating Missiles take effect, and Beauregard is damaged health equal to your power, which is 3. So again, Beauregard decides to discard 3 of these barrier shields. But she also takes 2 extra health for each reaction spell affecting the spell. So that was 2, her own, and this one, so that's 4 more damage. Beauregard only has 2 more of these shields, so she loses 2 health. But then Reactive Barrier takes effect, and since Reactive Barrier causes the caster of the spell to take damage equal to the loss of shield it caused after it resolves, it was very smart of Beauregard to get rid of all that shield first instead of damage, because she lost 3 plus 3 plus 2 makes 8 barrier shield crystals. So that means that Ocaria loses 8 health. So she decides to get rid of 4 of her barrier crystals, and then she loses 4 health. And so that was an example of how a round of Wizards of Roygbiv might play. Let's go to my final thoughts. So, time for my final thoughts on Wizards of Roygbiv by Sam Meurs. Well, first of all, I've played this a couple of times only. I haven't had a chance to play all of the decks. But from what I've seen so far, this is a pretty interesting deck builder. Because usually when you're playing deck builders, you've got cards that pay for the cards that you want to buy from the market. But in this game, basically, you're getting a card for free of your own color or of the neutral white deck, unless you pay a certain amount of energy to pick a different color in increasing numbers. So that's an interesting take on the deck building genre. It's, that you can take a card every turn, but only one, so everybody's building up their deck at the same speed. And depending on what you choose, you build your strategy. So if you're seeing an opponent who is, stocking up on defensive spells, you want to get rid of those defense crystals, and you want to go for direct damage perhaps, or something to counter his spells. And if someone else is going on the offensive, then you want to get defensive, or you want to be able to counter or deflect that spell. And that's pretty interesting. So I really like the fact that this is a relatively simple to learn game, but it's the kind of game that's easy to learn, hard to master, because there's 7 different decks with each their own strategy that you're going to have to find out how that works. So the first time you'll be playing one of those decks, you'll be trying to figure out, so what does this deck do? So, when red is very offensive and blue is very defensive, there's still 5 others to explore. And that to me is part of the fun of this game, to explore what that deck does and get comfortable with that, and then maybe move on or mix strategies. As soon as you've explored several of these decks, you may want to mix them up, spend some energy to get that card of a different color in there because that worked well last time. And maybe, what will happen if I mix it with this color deck? So that is quite interesting, and I think will provide lots of gameplay. So as far as that goes, I'm pretty positive about it. Of course, the components, this is still a prototype, so I can't say a whole lot about the components. You do get a lot of crystals and a lot of cubes, and the boards are very colorful and nice. And of course, also still prototypes, it's just foam board. You'll get cardboard player boards, of course. The icons are very easy to understand. I think there's a list of icons on the back of the rules booklet, and it shows you what everything means, so you'll get a hang of that very quickly. And also these all these boards have these colors on top that tell you that if you're purple in this case, or violet, then what do the other colors cost? If I want, this is indigo, I think, yeah. And if I want violet, it will cost me 1 energy. Then red is 2, orange is 3, and all the other colors are 4. So that's all pointed out quite clearly, and all of the steps that you take during the game are also clearly printed on the board with the icons and your special ability. I also quite like the artwork. I mean, it's very colorful, obviously, being, Wizards of the colors of the rainbow. So it's surely to be very colorful, and it really pops. The artwork on the boards is nice. I like the characters. The artwork on the cards is okay. I mean, it is very clean and very colorful and nice, but they're mostly books or shrines or stuff. So it's not like, you know, these epic scenes with monsters and wizards and all kinds of fantasy things that you will find in different kinds of deck building games. So it's keeping it relatively simple, but I think the art is very clean and very, well, very nice, really. It looks quite professional. And for a first-time indie developer of a board game, I think that's quite impressive. And I really like the fact that he's going to Kickstarter with this, to get it kickstarted and to get this game on the market, because that's really what Kickstarter is about for the indie developers mostly. I really like to see that succeed, so I'm really hoping that this game will fund and get lots of extra fundings so we can add some cool stretch goals. I have no idea what he's got in store for us, but I'm hoping, you know, to see lots of stretch goals, maybe some extra cards, maybe some improved or thicker player boards, what have you, some cool artwork on the box with some UV spot printing, whatever. You know, there's plenty of things that you can think of for making a game even cooler. So yeah, I really enjoyed the couple of games that I had the chance to play. I found it quite enjoyable. It's really easy to pick up. The people I taught it really got the hang of it relatively quickly. If you're familiar with deck building, that helps, of course. That makes it just that much faster. I also like the fact that besides from having lots of replayability, there's different versions to play this game, the versions of the rules. I mean, it plays really well 1 versus 1, where you're just battling another deck, basically, another player. But it also works in 2 versus 2, or in 3 teams of 2, or in 2 teams of 3. And you can decide to choose to play either, you know, last man standing, but that would mean that there's player elimination, which in the, you know, multiplayer game might not be desirable. Although in a multiplayer game, you do tend to attack, to go for the guy who's got the most defense or the most health, because, you know, when everybody's losing health and someone is running away with health and defense and building up lots of defensive crystals and got lots of health, and that is definitely the person to gang up on. So there could be some ganging up on, but I think that's kind of the fun part of this. This is a, you know, it's not a very heavy game. It's a light and fun battle game. So I think that's a cool thing to do, but you can also just, you know, play for first blood. You know, if you're the first one to completely kill another wizard, then you win. That is also a very cool way to play, and if you're with multiple players. So I really like the fact that you have several play versions to choose from. And maybe perhaps during the Kickstarter, players will, you know, backers will come up with several other ideas, and some will perhaps, he will definitely take those into consideration. And yeah, you see what happens with all the suggestions. So if this sounds interesting to you, and I do suggest that you at least check out the Kickstarter, then click the I in the top right corner, and or the link in the description below this video, and then check out that Kickstarter, give it a read through, and maybe, you know, follow it along for €1, or just go ahead and back it right away if this sounds interesting to you. I certainly think this is a game that deserves to see the day of light, that get published, because it has a lot of potential. And I also see a potential for expansions later on if this becomes very successful. I can see, you know, extra cards for each of the 7 decks, you know, new spells perhaps, or maybe even new characters, who knows, add in another color if you can fit in another color somewhere. I mean, it is Roygbiv, so that's basically the 7 colors. But who knows, there might be a neutral faction, or a gray or a black faction, or something like that. Just some ideas that I came up with, you know, while playing and while thinking about this game. So I do see a lot of potential for this game. So go ahead and check that out. That is on Kickstarter right now, Wizards of Roygbiv by Summers. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.